Hello, Facebook Live. Natasha is back. I'm so sorry that we missed last week. I was really looking forward to a Valentine's Day Sex Talk with Natasha event. Obviously, tragically, there was the school shooting in Florida, and I was really busy helping some colleagues in that area trying to just, gather some resources and things. So that's a really heavy topic. And of course, our hearts and our thoughts, and not just that, our advocacy is with the people in Florida. So just to mention that briefly. But we are going to make a makeup session on March 2nd. So we are going to, and here, let me actually put this on full view so people don't have to look at all my pictures. All right. So we're going to have March 2nd at 10 o'clock, same time. We're going to do the topic that we were supposed to do last week. So we'll kind of do a little bit of catch up and sessions in 1 week and make sure that we're on board. Tonight, we are here to talk about nudity in the home. This is a very kind of interesting and maybe exciting topic. I'm excited to talk about it. There's lots of complexities with it, so I'm excited to see what kinds of questions we get. And before we get started, Ashley, why don't you take it away and give us some information about Sex Talk?
Yeah, hi everybody. Welcome to Sex Talk with Natasha. Actually, let me, there we go. Just want to make sure that people could see me. Welcome everybody. And again, thanks for joining us as always. As a reminder, just with the format, we go on for an hour. The first half will be here on Facebook for free, and the rest you can catch on Patreon at our Patreon website. It's patreon.com/sextalkwithnatasha. So that's where you can find the full video. The first 20 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes, Natasha's going to give us some education, and then we're going to have a guest come on to ask specific questions about this topic. And then the last 20 minutes, we're going to leave it open to the audience to ask questions. So you can email us, you can send us a direct message, make a comment, however you want to do it. We definitely want to get to your questions, so feel free to ask whatever you want about this topic. Just for those that haven't subscribed to our Patreon page, it's a great way to get started with a sex therapist. There's different tiers, so you can get different things, so go check it out. You'll get access to this weekly live Q&A series. You'll get weekly blog posts from Natasha, homework assignments. We do webinars. Right now we're doing a great series on how to talk to your kids about sex. It's phenomenal. We just released our 4th episode yesterday, I think. So please go check that out. It's great. And as always, if anybody's interested in seeing Natasha professionally, you can check out her website, Symmetry Solutions. That's at symmetrysouls.com. And yeah, we're excited to be here, and I'll send it back over to Natasha.
All right, thank you. And just for those of you who don't know, Ashley Pacini is my kind of executive director of the whole show. So she really does all the behind work, memes, and shares all of this kind of tech stuff and gets me all organized. So she does a great job, and thank you, Ashley, for all the work that you do.
You're
all right, so let's, you're welcome. Yeah, thanks. So let's talk about nudity. Woo! So do you feel the anxiety rising when we think about nudity and children and our home environments? So my first thought on this is that obviously context and culture play a huge role in how we feel about nudity. There's obviously areas in the world where, from nude beaches in Europe to all kinds of different communities where, going topless or having very small amounts of clothing is just very much a part of that community's norm. And so nudity is not necessarily sexualized like it is very much so here in the United States. So nudity has been sexualized. We're very, again, coming from our puritanical background, we're very kind of attuned to how much skin is showing or not showing when it comes to our culture here in the United States. So there's no particular research that I could find anyway, other than maybe a few studies here and there that show that nudity has any harmful effects. And again, we're talking about non-sexualized nudity. This really is not a podcast on child abuse, right? Which is a whole different topic. And obviously there can be issues in that regard. And I'm going to be very careful to try to make sure the boundaries are clear between those two topics. But anyway, here in the United States, there's implications for parental autonomy. We tend to have a lot of ideas that parents have a right to raise their kids how they want. There's a lot of parental freedom in raising your kids with your own particular set of values or beliefs. And so what happens in your home is kind of up to you, as long as you're not crossing those boundaries that would get you reported, obviously, to Child Protective Services, which is an important thing to have happen if certain boundaries are being crossed. So again, the research doesn't really support any notion that nudity is harmful. And we're going to talk about a huge spectrum of what we mean by nudity, because there's homes where I think probably the majority of, I'm guessing, my audience would be wondering is, what happens when your kid kind of runs into the bedroom and you're changing and you're nude, right? Or at what point should we maybe stop showering with our kids, or having them shower together, or so kind of nudity in that context. And then on the other side of the huge spectrum are homes where nudity is kind of the, I guess, the norm. Like, we just want to have a household where you can kind of walk around in general in the nude, and that it's not a big deal to be able to do that. So we're going to talk a lot about kind of all those different things in that spectrum. So let's start with, I guess, young kids. So probably between the ages of obviously birth to about 4 or 5, kids are pretty non-concerned about their nudity status. And we see this through streakers, kids who are running up and down the hallways nude and love to take off their clothes. I'll never forget when I was in middle school, we had neighbors, and this cute little girl, she was probably about 2 years old. She comes running out of the house, totally in the nude, and just streaks down the sidewalk. And it was cold, but she was just like super free and hello, and here I am world, and just, we still laugh our heads off when we, think about the mom's face when she comes running out the door, just like, where did my kid go? And so it's very normal for young kids to not be that concerned about whether or not they're in the nude. And for them to also not be very concerned about whether you're in the nude. And so this is where our own anxieties come trickling up, because it's also very normal for kids to ask probing questions when they notice differences. So for example, if you've got a little boy and you're the mom, well, why don't you have a penis? And not only might he point, but he might actually try to touch you. What's that? Or your breasts, and so kids will touch and kind of probe you and prod you, and it can feel a little disconcerting, especially for those who are concerned and don't want to cross any inappropriate boundary, like, oh my goodness, did I just do something wrong? My child just touched my vulva, or my child just touched my penis, and I didn't even mean for that to happen. So there can be those kinds of concerning questions. But for the most part, when these things happen, they're just normal curiosity. And as long as you can manage your own anxiety and be very tonally appropriate, meaning that you're not scolding a child or being upset with a child for having those questions, but that can answer directly and also start placing boundaries, then you can see how sex education starts at a very early age, way before things are sexualized. And so that's a really great opportunity about having opportunities for nudity in your home. Another very common scenario is throwing kind of similar age kids into a bathtub, right? Like, let's get them all cleaned up. You've got a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, they're all different sex. And sometimes parents are like, oh, is that inappropriate? And again, most kids that age are not going to care too much. They're happy to play in the bathtub. There's cousins or friends even that will have those types of scenarios, and it's no big deal. Again, you might have probing questions. You might have a kid who tries to touch the penis of another kid. Like, what is that? Especially a little girl. Or why does he look different? Or why does she not have this? Again, teaching appropriate boundaries, just saying, hey, you know what? Those are your privates. And even though we're taking a bath together, we don't get to touch each other's privates. You know, that's not something that we get to do. So just keep your hands to yourself and play, and we'll have, you know, we'll have a good time. Again, tonally just kind of normalizing the whole event for the kids. Now, another thing I think that happens at this particular level is then at what point is, you know, adult nudity appropriate or not appropriate? We know with babies, for example, that it's actually very important to have skin on skin contact, so that can actually be very soothing to a baby. So any child like under the age of 18 months, to have their naked body against your naked chest, or, you know, stomach area or breasts or things of that nature, is actually very, very healthy for young infants. Sometimes parents have questions about, well, what if I sleep in the nude? And then my child, you know, comes into the bedroom with us and I'm in the nude. So again, if they're, you know, under the age of 6 or 5, or usually they don't even notice or care. And as long as, you know, you're not having any type of sexualized issue, which again, most of us don't with our kids, but some people do. And so you want to be aware of that, and for those particular people, there's just different boundaries that you need to place for yourself, obviously. But it's again, it doesn't have to be that big of a deal. Now, when we move, again, looking at this from a developmental context, so you start getting into the ages of 7, 8, 9, 10, that's typically, even as young as 5, that's typically about the time that kids kind of tune into what I call their inner modesty, their inner boundaries around their own body and their autonomy and their privacy around their body. And this can also happen later, like as late as 11 or 12. So you may have some pre-adolescent boys, for example, that are kind of clueless about whether or not they're nude, they don't care, and you might be concerned about that. You can always ask a pediatrician about developmental concerns, because we do know that, for example, kids maybe on the autism spectrum, or even with other developmental type of concerns, they may not be at the same level as their peers in regards to these kind of thresholds that we expect them to reach. So you might have, like, for instance, a 15-year-old who, in a sense, is acting like a 7-year-old. And that can cause its own, you know, types of issues. But that's, again, a kind of a different topic than what we're talking about. Most kids tune into some level of privacy between the ages of 5 and 11 or 12, and with most of them being more around 7, 8, 9. So when that happens, I think this is a really great opportunity to start tuning into these concepts of consent and respect for your child, so that it's not so much about, well, in my house or in this house, this is how we do it. It's more about teaching, oh, you're uncomfortable, or, oh, you don't want to take a shower with your brother anymore, or, oh, you don't want to see me nude. That's okay. I'll respect that. So that we can really help kids have their own boundaries, learn how to communicate their boundaries, and be respectful. And really, this starts the whole kind of education around consent from a very early age. So just kind of follow your kid's lead, as long as you feel like it's an appropriate developmental lead in that regard. Now, what happens when there's just life? Life happens, right? So you can have a 12-year-old who, you know, doesn't necessarily want to see you nude, and yet they've just barged into your bedroom and you're in the middle of dressing, and, you know, they've just seen you naked, you know. So what do you do in those particular situations? And so I want to just kind of consider a few options as far as your responses. So one thing I want you to think about is that we don't need to be, even if we have a home where we want certain levels of privacy and where we don't have a lot of nudity, we don't want to necessarily give the message that we're ashamed of our bodies, or that our bodies are bad, or that we need to hide and cover them up. So I really recommend practicing just a natural stance, you know, so that so that when kids come barging in, you're not necessarily, all of a sudden, hiding. You're just kind of like, huh, you just walked in on me, like, hello, and yeah, so that happened, and you can see their kids' reaction. Sometimes they'll be like, oh, mom, gross, or oh, dad, I can't believe it, I'm scarred for life, those kinds of comments. And again, you can just be very casual and matter of fact, like, you're not scarred for life. My body isn't going to scar you for life just because you saw me a few times. It's like, take a chill pill, and so like just help the tone kind of come down. And if you're comfortable in your own skin, and if you kind of treat it super matter of fact, then that will translate into a message to your kids. I know that sometimes, for example, if I'm in my bedroom and everybody, maybe it's Saturday morning, everybody's kind of climbed into my bedroom, but I'm ready to get up and take a shower, I'll just say, okay, well, I'm getting up. I don't have a door necessarily that covers between my bedroom and my shower. So I'm like, I'm getting ready to shower. So unless anybody wants to see me naked, it's time to go, so I'm kind of leaving it up to them. And sometimes they'll just turn over and they won't look, or sometimes they'll be like, I'm so out of here, or so just letting them know through my boundaries, this is what's going to happen. Mom's about to get naked. If you want to see mom naked, I guess that's your prerogative, but otherwise you can just take off. The other thing I want you to think about too is that our children are seeing naked bodies. I mean, we know through the research that most kids have had some level of contact with pornography, from a pretty early age, as early as 10 or 11, and even earlier for some. And so another reason why I don't want to hide or like completely be, so rigid about them never seeing me naked is that if they kind of bump into my naked body or my husband's naked body at some point, I think it normalizes bodies. Like, bodies come in all shapes and sizes. Boobs looks different than you might see on TV. A penis that's just kind of walking around what looks different than the penis on TV, so I think that there's an opportunity in regards to just kind of normalizing the body. And if the parents can just be comfortable in, again, not necessarily hiding themselves, not flaunting themselves, but not hiding themselves, I think that can be really useful for kids to just be like, oh yeah, bodies, look different. And also I kind of mentioned this already, but just pushing back lovingly on disrespectful comments. Like if they're like, ew, yuck, or I'm like, hey, like, I like my body, my body isn't yuck. So not, you don't need to be attracted to my body, obviously, but treat me with respect too. So again, there's so many opportunities here to be talking to your kids and teaching your kids through an example of how nudity can be addressed in your home. Before we go to questions, one thing that I want to just really be careful about is, again, with context. So if you're in a blended family, this might be trickier, especially if you have issues with custody. Again, because we live in a puritanical kind of based country, I have heard some kind of horror stories where when people are trying to be, non-shaming or be more open about being nude, a non-custodial parent can use that against them in the court. So those things can happen. So you just want to be careful in those situations. Plus, if you're a step parent, there is a different level of comfort zone than a biological parent, especially if you're somewhat new to the family and if you've joined the family at the developmental ages that the kids are maybe 7 and older. So you just, again, people can walk in on each other, you can do the same things, but you want to be careful as far as maybe being in those types of situations where you're more on the spectrum of like, well, we just have a nude home. So those are some just ideas that you want to consider. And also, again, in our adult nudity with children and adolescents is not the norm in our country. That's just the reality. And so if you're going to go a little bit more on the spectrum of just having a nude home, just be aware that that can sometimes be have social ramifications, or can have, you know, friends may think that's weird of your kids. Your kids may feel uncomfortable because their home is different than other people's homes. So again, tuning into what your kids like or need, or what their opinion is about these matters, I think is important. Okay, so that kind of brings me to a close on my organized thoughts about this topic. And now let's delve into questions and see what else we get to.